World War I was not a sudden explosion of violence, but rather the inevitable result of decades of mounting tensions across Europe. Two powerful forces were reshaping the continent: rising nationalism and fierce imperial competition. Nationalism swept across Europe like wildfire. Each great power believed not only in its own cultural superiority, but in its divine right to expand and dominate. The German Empire saw itself as the natural leader of Central Europe. France sought to reclaim its position as the continent's premier power. Britain viewed its vast empire as proof of Anglo-Saxon superiority. By 1914, European powers had carved up most of the world between them. This map reveals the staggering scope of imperial competition. Britain controlled nearly a quarter of the world's land surface, from India to Canada to Australia. France dominated West Africa and Indochina. Germany, arriving late to the colonial game, desperately sought its place in the sun. Africa became the primary battleground of imperial competition. The scramble for Africa saw European powers racing to claim territory, resources, and strategic positions. Britain sought to control a corridor from Cairo to Cape Town. France dominated the western regions. Germany, despite arriving late, secured valuable colonies in East and Southwest Africa, creating friction with established powers. By 1914, these forces of nationalism and imperialism had transformed Europe into a powder keg. Decades of competition for colonies, resources, and prestige had created explosive tensions. Each nation armed itself heavily, formed defensive alliances, and prepared for what many saw as an inevitable conflict. All that was needed was a single spark to ignite this volatile mixture. The stage was set for catastrophe. All that remained was for someone to light the fuse. That moment would come on a summer day in Sarajevo, when a single gunshot would plunge the world into its first global war. June 28, 1914. A date that would forever change the course of world history. In the Bosnian city of Sarajevo, a single gunshot would ignite a global conflict that would consume nations and reshape the world. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary had come to Sarajevo to inspect military maneuvers. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, he was accompanied by his beloved wife, Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg. But this visit would not go as planned. Among the crowds lining the streets was a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip, a member of the secret organization known as the Black Hand. The assassination plot had been carefully planned. Serbian nationalists sought to free Bosnia-Herzegovina from Austro-Hungarian rule and unite all South Slavs under Serbian leadership. Franz Ferdinand's visit presented the perfect opportunity. The royal couple's motorcade made its way through the streets of Sarajevo. The first assassination attempt failed when a bomb thrown by another conspirator missed its target, but fate would intervene when the driver took a wrong turn. At approximately 10:50 a.m., as the driver attempted to reverse and correct his route, the car came to a stop directly in front of where Gavrilo Princip was standing. Seizing this unexpected opportunity, Princip stepped forward and fired two fatal shots. The assassination sent shockwaves throughout Europe. Austria-Hungary, long seeking an excuse to crush Serbian nationalism, saw this as the perfect pretext for military action against Serbia. On July 23, 1914, Austria-Hungary delivered a harsh ultimatum to Serbia. The document contained 10 demands designed to be so humiliating that Serbia would be forced to reject them, providing Austria-Hungary with justification for war. Serbia accepted most of the demands, but rejected the most humiliating ones, particularly allowing Austrian officials to operate on Serbian soil. This partial rejection was exactly what Austria-Hungary had hoped for. The stage was now set for war. Austria-Hungary had its pretext, and the complex web of European alliances would soon transform a regional conflict into a world war. The assassination in Sarajevo had lit the fuse that would explode across the continent. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was merely the spark that ignited a powder keg. Europe in 1914 was bound by a complex web of military alliances that would transform a regional crisis into a global catastrophe. By 1914, Europe was divided into two major alliance systems. These alliances were designed to maintain the balance of power, but they would ultimately guarantee that any conflict would spread rapidly across the continent. The Triple Entente formed gradually between 1894 and 1907. France and Russia allied first, driven by their mutual fear of German expansion. Britain joined later, concerned about German naval buildup and colonial competition. Opposing them were the Central Powers. Germany and Austria-Hungary had been allies since 1879, bound by shared interests in Central Europe. The Ottoman Empire would join them in 1914, seeking to regain lost territories and resist further decline. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914, the alliance system activated like a row of falling dominoes. Each nation was bound by treaty obligations to defend its allies, transforming a regional conflict into a continental war. The sequence of events unfolded with terrifying speed. Russia mobilized to support Serbia. Germany, fearing encirclement, declared war on Russia. France, bound by alliance, was drawn in. Germany's invasion of Belgium brought Britain into the conflict. In just 1 week, the alliance system had transformed the assassination of an Austrian archduke into a global conflict. What began as a dispute between Austria-Hungary and Serbia had engulfed the major powers of Europe. The entangling alliances, designed to preserve peace through deterrence, had instead guaranteed that war would spread like wildfire across the continent. As war erupted across Europe in August 1914, Germany faced its greatest strategic challenge, fighting a war on 2 fronts against France in the west and Russia in the east. German military planners had spent years developing a solution to this dilemma. The Schlieffen Plan, named after German Field Marshal Alfred von Schlieffen, was designed to avoid the nightmare of a prolonged 2-front war. The strategy was deceptively simple. Concentrate the majority of German forces against France, defeat it within 6 weeks, then rapidly redeploy eastward to face the slower mobilizing Russian army. The plan's crucial element was the violation of Belgian neutrality. German forces would sweep through Belgium and northern France in a massive wheeling movement, encircling Paris and forcing French surrender. This required precise timing and overwhelming force concentrated on the right wing of the German advance. On August 4, 1914, the plan was set in motion. German armies crossed into Belgium, bringing Britain into the war as guarantor of Belgian neutrality. The German First Army, commanded by Alexander von Kluck, spearheaded the advance through Belgium toward France. Initially, the German advance seemed unstoppable. Belgian fortresses fell, and German forces pushed rapidly through northern France. By early September, German troops were within 30 miles of Paris. The French government prepared to evacuate the capital as panic gripped the city. But the Schlieffen Plan contained fatal flaws. The German right wing had been weakened by the need to garrison conquered territories and by the transfer of troops to the Eastern Front. More critically, the German First Army made a crucial error by turning southeast too early, exposing its flank to a French counterattack. On September 6, 1914, French Marshal Ferdinand Foch launched the Battle of the Marne. French and British forces attacked the exposed German flank, forcing the Germans to retreat to the Aisne River. The German dream of a quick victory was shattered. The war of movement was over, and the deadly stalemate of trench warfare was about to begin. While the Western Front descended into stalemate, the Eastern Front told a different story. Here, German forces under Generals Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff achieved a stunning victory against the Russians at the Battle of Tannenberg in late August 1914. The Russian Second Army, advancing into East Prussia, was encircled and destroyed by superior German tactics. Over 90,000 Russian soldiers were captured, and their commander, General Alexander Samsonov, took his own life in despair. This victory made Hindenburg and Ludendorff national heroes in Germany. By the end of 1914, the nature of World War I had fundamentally changed. The Schlieffen Plan's failure on the Western Front meant that Germany now faced exactly what it had sought to avoid: a prolonged war on 2 fronts. The age of rapid, decisive battles was ending, and a new form of warfare was emerging. By 1915, the Western Front had transformed into a nightmare of static warfare. What began as a war of movement had devolved into something far more sinister: trench warfare. Life in the trenches was a constant battle against the elements. Soldiers lived in waterlogged ditches, surrounded by mud that could swallow a man whole. The trenches were infested with rats, some as large as cats, feeding on the corpses and food scraps. Soldiers developed ingenious ways to hunt these vermin for both sport and necessity. The unsanitary conditions led to horrific diseases. Trench foot was perhaps the most common, caused prolonged exposure to wet and cold conditions, often resulting in amputation. The introduction of new weapons made trench warfare even more deadly. Machine guns could mow down hundreds of men in minutes, making frontal assaults virtually suicidal. Perhaps most terrifying was the introduction of poison gas. Chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gas caused blindness, chemical burns, and agonizing death. Gas attacks created a new kind of horror on the battlefield. Artillery bombardments were constant and devastating. Massive shells weighing hundreds of pounds could obliterate entire sections of trench, burying men alive and creating a landscape of craters and destruction. Trench warfare represented a new kind of hell on earth. Soldiers lived in constant fear, surrounded by death, disease, and destruction. This static warfare would define the Western Front for years, claiming millions of lives in a brutal stalemate. By 1914, what began as a European conflict rapidly transformed into the first truly global war in human history. The Ottoman Empire's decision to join the Central Powers opened entirely new theaters of combat across 3 continents. In October 1914, the Ottoman Empire formally allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary. This decision brought the Islamic world into the conflict and opened new fronts stretching from the Caucasus Mountains to the Arabian Peninsula. The war's global reach becomes clear when we examine this world map showing the allegiances of nations across every continent. From the dominions of the British Empire to German colonies in Africa and the Pacific, no corner of the world remained untouched. One of the most ambitious and ultimately tragic campaigns was the Allied attempt to force the Dardanelles Strait and capture Constantinople. The Gallipoli campaign would become synonymous with heroic sacrifice and strategic failure. British, French, Australian, and New Zealand forces landed on the peninsula in April 1915, hoping to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. Instead, they encountered fierce resistance from Turkish defenders led by Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk. While the Allies struggled at Gallipoli, a different kind of warfare erupted in the Arabian desert. The Arab Revolt, encouraged by British agent T.E. Lawrence, saw Bedouin tribes rise against their Ottoman rulers. Led by Sharif Hussein of Mecca and his sons, Arab forces conducted guerrilla warfare against Ottoman supply lines. Their mobile cavalry attacks disrupted Turkish communications and tied down thousands of troops needed elsewhere. The global nature of this conflict is perhaps best illustrated by the colonial troops who traveled thousands of miles to fight in foreign lands. Soldiers from India, Africa, Australia, and Canada found themselves in trenches far from home. Over 1 million Indian soldiers served in the British forces. African troops fought in campaigns across their own continent and in Europe. The war truly became a conflict of empires, drawing in peoples from every inhabited continent. Military leaders from across the globe coordinated this unprecedented conflict. The war required new forms of international cooperation and communication as battles raged simultaneously across multiple continents. By 1916, the Great War had become exactly that, a truly global conflict spanning from the trenches of France to the deserts of Arabia, from the mountains of the Caucasus to the colonies of Africa. No previous war in human history had touched so many lives across so many continents. For nearly 3 years, the United States maintained a position of neutrality as Europe tore itself apart in the Great War. President Woodrow Wilson declared America would remain impartial, stating the nation was too proud to fight. Germany's decision to resume unrestricted submarine warfare in early 1917 marked a turning point. German U-boats began attacking all ships, including neutral vessels, in the waters around Britain. This map shows the devastating impact of German submarine attacks on Allied and neutral shipping. In January 1917, British intelligence intercepted a secret telegram from German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann to Mexico. The telegram proposed a military alliance between Germany and Mexico against the United States, promising Mexico the return of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. On April 6, 1917, President Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany, stating that the world must be made safe for democracy. The combination of unrestricted submarine warfare and the Zimmermann telegram had finally pushed America into the conflict. America rapidly mobilized for war. Millions of soldiers were drafted and trained, while American industry converted to wartime production. Here we see American troops preparing to embark for Europe, ready to join the fight on the Western Front. The arrival of American forces fundamentally shifted the balance of power on the Western Front. Fresh troops, abundant supplies, and American industrial might reinvigorated the exhausted Allied forces. By 1918, the tide of war had decisively turned in favor of the Allies. On November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., the guns finally fell silent across the Western Front. The Great War was over, but the aftermath would reshape the world in ways no one could have imagined. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, imposed devastating terms on Germany. The treaty demanded massive territorial losses, military restrictions, and crippling financial reparations. Perhaps most crushing were the war reparations. Germany was forced to pay 132 billion gold marks, equivalent to over $400 billion today. This enormous burden would cripple the German economy for decades. The war's end brought the collapse of four great empires. The German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman empires all disintegrated, leading to a complete redrawing of the European map. From the ashes of these empires, new nations emerged. Poland was reborn after 123 years of partition. Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia were created from Austro-Hungarian territories. The Middle East was carved into new mandates under British and French control. Beyond the political upheaval, the war left deep psychological scars. Millions of veterans returned home, suffering from what was then called shell shock, now known as post-traumatic stress disorder. The trauma extended to families and entire communities. The war also transformed civilian life. Food rationing, women entering the workforce, and technological advances changed society forever. The conflict had mobilized entire populations, blurring the lines between soldier and civilian. The legacy of World War I shaped the entire 20th century. The harsh peace terms sowed the seeds of future conflict. The war's unprecedented destruction changed how humanity viewed warfare, technology, and international relations forever.